Mac Power Users, episode 499, Backups and Updates. Hello, everyone. This is David Sparks, joined by my old pal, Stephen Hackett. How you doing, Stephen?
I'm good, David. How are you today?
Well, first of all, it's episode 499, which is kind of crazy, right?
Yeah.
I'm just looking at the number. We're almost there.
Mm-hmm.
Next week's episode is going to, I already know what it's going to be like because we recorded it earlier. I kind of fell apart at the beginning. I think you did that to me on purpose. But it was a good show, and looking forward to that next week. But this week, we wanted to take a minute to talk about two things. We've got these updates coming from Apple. You know, we're getting new operating systems for your phone, your watch, your Mac, your TV. All these things are coming down the road. It's been a long time since we covered on the show really how to prepare for that. And I think there are some things you can definitely do to help. Mm-hmm. This year in particular, because of some big changes on the Mac side. And we have not had an opportunity to discuss backups since you came on the show. And I think that, number one, I want to hear your strategy on backups. And number two, mines have changed a little bit over the last couple of years. And, you know, the technology's gotten easier. But I just thought it'd be a good time to just cover the topic of backup. So today we're going to cover backing up and getting ready for all these updates.
Yeah, the two really go hand in hand, right? You want to, before you go to an operating system, it's a great opportunity to evaluate your backups, make sure you have everything in place. And I think we're also going to talk about how to get other people in your life, making sure their computers are backed up, their devices are backed up. Because the reality is none of this stuff is all that difficult to implement basic things, but people just don't think they need it or they don't know about it or are intimidated. So I think we can all kind of help the people in our lives be better prepared for, you know, device failure, hardware failure. Eventually, your laptop will croak or your iPhone will go down a water slide or something. You want your data back. And so we're going to try to prevent some of those tragedies in all of our lives. And
it's definitely not unheard of that you do a big system update and something goes wrong and you lose data. So this isn't a prime time to get that going. And also, like Stephen was saying, we want to talk a little bit later about the muggles. I don't know what the word you use for that. But the the people who aren't not really into this stuff. And how do we get them to kind of get on board with it? But before we do so, I think we need to do a check-in over at St. Jude. How's it going?
It's great. So September is National Childhood Cancer Awareness Month. We started speaking about this last couple of weeks, where every year the Relay audience and sort of honestly like the Apple community at large, beyond just the Relay shows, we set some time aside to talk about the work of St. Jude and to raise money for their organization. It's a children's hospital here in Memphis, Tennessee that treats kids with cancer and other catastrophic diseases from around the world. I've met families from all corners of the globe with kids at St. Jude, and they do it all without charging the families a dime, which is really incredible. And that's why this fundraising is honestly so important, because we want to make sure they can continue that work, not only for my kid, but for, of course, thousands of others. So our goal is $75,000. As of this recording, we're at $27,000. That will be, I assume, much higher by the time the show comes out. But if you want to learn more and you want to give, you want to head over to stjude.org/MPU.
Yeah, go in there, everybody. MPU has historically been a really big supporter of the St. Jude Drive with Stephen. And now that Stephen's on the show, I think we really need to show our support. So if you can afford it, please go in and help out.
That'd be awesome. And one of the employees at St. Jude who's helping us with this campaign, she had this idea to torture Mike and I during the fundraising, where any donation, $250 or more, I will add a sticker to an Apple device, and Mike, my co-founder at Relay, will remove a sticker from one of his devices. And you may think, well, that's not a big deal.
No.
I despise sticker-covered laptops and iPads, and he loves them. And so we are both suffering. As of this right now, I've got like 25 new stickers on my MacBook Pro. I'm linking in the show notes a Twitter thread where I am just every few days putting an update out of like, hey, this is what my devices look like now. This is challenging for me. But it's for a good cause.
I know you, Stephen, and I know this is driving you crazy. I can just feel the itchiness in your voice.
It's not great. It's not great at all.
All right. Well, everybody, let's cover Steven's MacBook and stickers and help support St. Jude. And thank you all who have already given. I know there's a lot of you out there that have already done that.
Absolutely.
All right. So let's start with this idea of backups. And I think I want to take on the hardest one first. And in my mind, that's the Mac.
Yes. Agreed. There's countless ways to do this. I think we're going to talk about sort of some general ways that cover most use cases. But first, I want to talk about some general backup principles, just some things that can help shape your backup strategy for your Mac. Some of these solutions we're going to talk about have competitors that we're not going to mention necessarily because there's so many options. But these are sort of, in my mind, the guiding rules around backing up data on a macOS machine. Because the truth is that any piece of data, a Word document, a family photo, whatever, if it's just in one place, then unfortunately it is temporary because Macs are better than ever, right? Like SSDs are incredible. They're nice and fast and light, a great battery life. Every computer eventually will fail. That's just the reality of the world we live in. And if your data is only on one device and that one device fails, chances are it's gone. Or maybe it's only accessible through super expensive data recovery, and maybe not even then. So having a multi-tiered strategy can really save your bacon. So having that PDF, Word document, family photo on more than one physical device is really what we're after.
Okay, I have a war story. I've shared this before on MPU, but I'm going to share it again anyway for those who haven't heard it. And it was when I was at the Apple Store once and getting some work done on my device, and there was a woman there whose MacBook hard drive failed. It failed spectacularly. Mm-hmm. And she had graduated from college a few years ago. She was active in her sorority, and she lost her entire college collection of photos. This is before iCloud Photos. It was, a few years back. But she sat there in the store, and the tears were just running down her face. She wasn't, sobbing out loud. It was even more tragic because she was crying without making a sound, And I felt so bad for her, but I think about that all the time. I think having actually a couple of war stories in your pocket can help out to inspire you and others to remember to back up. I'm sure you had some pretty bad ones when you worked at the Apple Store.
Yeah, in fact, while you were talking about that, I was reminded of the worst case of a similar story. A woman at My Genius Bar with a PowerBook, because I was a genius a long time ago, and lost the hard drive. We're talking about data recovery options, which are very expensive and definitely not a guarantee. But it came out in the course of conversation that she had family photos on there of a child that had passed away. And
oh my gosh,
boy, if I could have taken Apple's checkbook out and written a check to cover her data recovery and guaranteed it would have worked, I would have done it. It's just heartbreaking. And the reality is we have that sort of data now, right? It's not, we're well past the days of you only use a computer for your work or only for school, right?
Yeah.
These devices have all of that stuff intermingled, especially the thing I always think about is photos because, you lose a paper or a project, that's really terrible, but your kid is not going to be 3 years old again, right? You can't recreate their 4th birthday party.
Yeah.
And it's so important. And the reason we're preaching this is because because we've seen it, right? We know what that's like. And I don't want anyone to have to go through that. I mean, I would be heartbroken. I would be beside myself if I lost photos of my kids growing up. And so I won't, as we're going to talk about our backup strategies as we go, I mean, it would be like a civilization-ending event for me to lose my pictures. And at that point, okay, right? If we're all gone, then the JPEGs can go too. But short of that, I know that I'm going to be safe. And You have this great post you put in the show notes about the 3-2-1 backup rule. Can you walk us through this? Because I think this really encapsulates it nicely.
Yeah, and I just wanted to say before we get into that, in the case of backup, an ounce of provision is like 100 pounds of cure. I mean, it's so trivial to do a backup system, as we're going to talk about in this show. But the 3-2-1 backup rule, I've talked about it before, and every time I talk about it, somebody tells me that there's somebody else who came up with the idea. And I don't know that anybody knows who wrote up the first one, but this is a post by Alex Mayer. And the 321 backup rules is really easy to remember. You have to keep 3 copies of your data. You have to store 2 copies on different storage media, and at least one of them has to be offsite. Make sense?
I love how simple it is. This is
3
perfect.
copies, two different storage media, 1 offsite. If you can do that, you're probably going to be fine.
I think some people look at this and think, well, my photos are in iCloud Photo Library, or all my Word documents are in Dropbox. And I would argue that while having things synced to a cloud service is good in terms of data redundancy, so you have your MacBook Air, it gets run over by a dump truck, and you can log into a new MacBook Air a few days later and log in with iCloud and Dropbox, and those documents come back. Cloud Sync is not really a backup. Anything with a syncing mechanism, if something goes wrong in one place, that is going to populate to those other locations very easily in the background. You won't even know it. And yes, there's Dropbox and these others have some short-lived data recovery where, I deleted this document, let me go undelete it from my Dropbox account. That's not really the same thing as a backup. It's a good step, and I think you can factor it into what you're doing, but just saying that, everything on my laptop is in Dropbox, so I don't need Time Machine. I don't think that's a solid way to move forward. It's better than nothing, but I would argue that it's not enough at the same time.
Yeah, I think something Steven said I want to put an exclamation point on. Cloud sync does not equal cloud backup. It can be an in case of emergency break glass scenario. Maybe there's, for whatever reason, that's the only place you can go. But your Dropbox or even your iCloud doesn't count as one of your 321.3s. It doesn't count.
Yep.
So don't treat it that way, because there's a lot of scenarios where you'll go to find that data and it won't be there. There is cloud backup, and we're going to talk about that in the show, but Cloud Sync isn't enough. So you need, I guess if we've scared everybody enough by now, but you need to have a realistic system to back up your data. And the other piece of the 321 that I think is essential that a lot of people, even nerds that listen to MPU, may miss is the idea of an offsite backup, because offsite is real important. If you've got a Time Machine connected to your computer and your house burns down, or somebody breaks in and steals your computer and the hard drive sitting next to it, you're still out of luck. So offsite is key.
Right. I mean, if your iMac is on your desk and the backup for that iMac is on the desk, that's not really 2 copies, right? It's 1 copy. It's 2 copies in the sense that if your iMac dies, the data is still on the hard drive. But as far as security and safety of that device, they're the same thing effectively. So you kind of have to think from the risk management perspective of, if a tree falls through my office, or my house gets hit by lightning and burns down, or we have a flood, or someone breaks in and takes everything off my desk, right? Those are kind of terrible things to think about. And I don't like thinking about the world through that lens. But in this conversation of 321, that's a huge deal. And thankfully, getting data offsite, as we'll talk about, is way easier than it's ever been. You can do it a bunch of different ways that are pretty easy and straightforward. So I think in the past that, people thought that, that means I have to, go through a lot of things to get my data somewhere else. And that's just not the case anymore for most people, most sets of data.
Now, one thing I'd like to talk about in the 321 is the 2. We kind of skip over the 2. 2 different mediums. I'm not sure that really applies anymore. For me, I can tell you all of my backups that I control are done on spinning disk hard drives. In the old days, maybe we put them on, CD-ROMs or floppies or whatever. In fact, in the show notes, Stephen wrote that he buries floppies in his backyard.
Just in case.
I love that. I love that. But I don't do that anymore. Do you think that's a mistake?
I don't think that. Yeah, I agree with you. I don't think the different mediums is as big of a deal as it used to be. I kind of view that part of the rule as more than one physical device. I could separate the 2 and put one in my backpack and take it with me. So I don't know if it's as important at this point to have a spinning hard drive in my laptop. So I want my data on a CD, or, if you think back in the day, magnetic tape or something like that. So I agree with you. I think that particular language is going to be a little dated. And for me, it's just can they be separated? Are they actually two different physical devices, even if internally they both use spinning hard drives or they both use SSD? I don't think that's as important anymore.
Yeah, but I would say when you talk about the backup medium, that you do need to be aware of its pitfalls. Hard drives don't last forever. If you spin up a hard drive, put a bunch of data on it, and put it on a shelf for 10 years, and you come back, there's a very good chance that's not going to spin up again, and whatever on there is gone. So you need to, routinely spin them up. You need to, keep track of how old they are. I have a label machine. When I buy the drive and add it to the system, I just put a label with the date on it and stick it on the back of the drive. And when I get to 3 to 5 years old, I start thinking about, the next time Amazon has a sale, I'm going to take this one out of the rotation.
This is probably not as big of a concern as it once was, but for a while there, maybe your backup drive was like FireWire 400, and then your new computer didn't even have FireWire, so you'd have adapt back to it and stuff. That's all calmed down a lot in the world of USB, but for a time that was a factor. And at this point, I think I don't think many people are backing up to like DVDs, but optical media also has a pretty short shelf life, especially if it's in the sun or gets, hot and cold repeatedly. You put a bunch of DVDs in a shoebox and put them in your attic, they're not going to last super long. And so the way I think about this particular aspect of this topic is if you have old backups that are on an old hard drive, you haven't gotten out of the closet for a while, or you have all your college papers backed up on CD, maybe take this opportunity to move that data to something a bit more modern or something that's, a little more reliable than what it is now, because you don't want to be in a situation 5 years from now where something that's okay today, has aged out over that time period. So as we're talking about this today, think about that. If you have something that's, been floating around a long time, even though you don't necessarily need the data right now, sometimes it's a good thing to move that data over to something a little fresher, if you will.
Yeah, maybe that's a new rule. You should say everything should be migrated at least within the last 3 years. Nothing should be on a backup device that is more than 3 years old. And you'll probably be safe. We just found, we were cleaning out the house, we found my old MacWrite floppies,
Ooh, nice. Yeah. Well, this came to mind for me. I have a consulting client here in town, a musician, and I'm helping him get a new machine set up. And he has basically years of work archived on a zip disk. And they're all like,
oh boy.
Do you remember, our listeners will remember, I'm sure, the shelves full, and you just put zip disks, slide the zip disks in their cases into the shelves.
Yeah, they look great. They look great on the shelf. Yeah.
It looks super cool, but he has, I don't even know. He doesn't even know a decade's worth of work in those things.
Oh my goodness. That's terrifying.
Yeah. So we probably ought to find a zip disk, external zip disk reader and move that data to something else, because those things are not going to last forever.
I had a zip disk, and I had a case where it had little buttons where you'd press the button and it would pop out on the storage.
That's cool.
I thought I had it all figured out.
You did have it all figured out. That's awesome.
Yeah. You just press a button, it popped out. It felt very felt very fancy.
This episode of Mac Power Users is brought to you by SaneBox. SaneBox has changed my relationship with my email because it learns what email is important to me and filters out what isn't. And I don't even know how much time it saves me throughout the week. So it looks at my incoming email. I happen to use G Suite for my work email, but SaneBox can connect to all sorts of things. And it's looking at what comes into my inbox. And if it's something that doesn't really matter, so, I get a lot of PR pitches or just random email, it can move them all into a folder named Sane Later. And they're not in my inbox. They're not clogging up what I need to do there. And I can just go through my Sane Later mailbox when I get a chance. And honestly, the hit rate is so good with SaneBox. But if there is something that I don't want there, I can drag it back in my inbox, and it learns and it figures it out. There's also Sane Black Hole. So some of those emails, I don't want to hear from those people again. Maybe my email address got sold, is on some sort of list. I get all sorts of crazy things, and I don't want them from that sender anymore. I can drag the message from into Sane Black Hole, and I don't hear from that sender again. It's like unsubscribing with a single click. It's absolutely great. I can snooze email into the next business day or the weekend, and I can even set up reminders. So say that I send David an email and I want to follow up in a week, I could CC 1 week at sanebox.com. And if David hasn't gone back to me yet, I get a reminder in my inbox saying, hey, you need to go bug Sparky again. It's fantastic. SaneBox has a bunch of different plans starting as low as about $4 a month. And there's a 14-day free trial. And I definitely recommend the free trial because once you get used to your email working this way, you don't want to go back. And in fact, 66% of MPU listeners who have tried SaneBox end up subscribing. So I bet you're going to love it. Head on over to sanebox.com/MPU and you will receive a $25 credit on any plan. That's sanebox.com/MPU for $25 towards any of their plans. My thanks to SaneBox for not only supporting our show, but making my email more manageable.
All right, let's get in the weeds on some of the Mac backup tools. And I think we should probably start with Time Machine.
I think it's a great place to start because I think anyone who is using a Mac, look, Time Machine's been built in since like Leopard.
Yeah.
It's bulletproof. It's already there. You don't have to go buy third-party software. It's definitely the place to start. I'm just going to go ahead and say it now. I have a bunch of K-Base articles in the, there you go. That sounds like the right number. Walking you through Time Machine, how it works. I'm gonna walk you through the whole process. You buy an external hard drive, you plug it into your Mac. The Mac asks if you want to use it with Time Machine. You click yes, and that's it.
That's it?
It couldn't be easier. It could not be easier.
Well, I mean, I'm sure the experience of having people show up to the Genius Bar and losing data is one of the big reasons Apple made it so easy.
I think so because, Apple doesn't view data loss as its problem, right? Like Apple isn't liable for that. But Apple's made up of people, and I think lots of people felt bad that people were losing their data, and they wanted a really easy tool to make people, make backing up more accessible, if you will. And Time Machine definitely does that. You can back up to an external hard drive. A big question I get at this is, how big of a hard drive should I use for Time Machine? And my general recommendation is go with twice the total capacity of your machine. So if you have a MacBook Pro with a 512 gig SSD, get at least 1 terabyte for a Time Machine drive. That's the minimum. And the reason I say that is because of the way Time Machine works. So it backs up everything on your Mac automatically. All files are copied, so the initial backup takes a while. But then it just backs up changes. So if you think about a folder on your desktop, and there's a single PDF in that folder. So the PDF gets backed up on Tuesday. On Wednesday, you add a JPEG to that folder. Well, on Wednesday, Time Machine will back up that JPEG. The PDF hasn't changed. It just backs up the JPEG. And then say Thursday rolls around and you make edits to that PDF. On Thursday, Time Machine is going to go get the changes to that PDF and back that up as well. So over time, you're building a history on your Time Machine drive of the state of that folder and all other folders on your computer as time progresses. And this is super handy because what this allows you to do is to say, oh, I need the version of this PDF I created 4 days ago, not 3 days ago, not 5 days ago, but right in the middle. And Time Machine lets you do that. And the cost of that is that it eats up backup drive space, which is why I recommend getting at least twice the capacity. Although on my iMac Pro, I'm looking now, I have a terabyte SSD and I have a 4 terabyte Time Machine drive. You can definitely go bigger.
Yeah.
But at least 2x is what I recommend these days.
It's so well named, Time Machine, because you can do that. You can go back in time. I just did that this morning because I screwed up one of the screencasts on the shortcuts thing I've been working on. And I had a good version yesterday. And rather than try and unwind what I did today, I just went in Time Machine, pulled out yesterday's version, and started from there. Mm-hmm. And that's something that people forget they have. But it's dead simple to use. Open Time Machine, and you scroll back. I even like the way they do it, the visual feel through the Finder, the way you can kind of scroll through it. This is not something that I don't think you need to buy an SSD for.
No, it's just going to chug along in the background, and the way it's designed, the first backup will take a while.
Yeah.
But after that, it's just backing up things you change every hour. So any given hour, there's not that much data to move. And again, if we want a big volume, hard drives are so cheap that you can just get a 4 terabyte one pretty inexpensively and shove it under your desk somewhere. I do get a question about like which brand hard drive you should buy. And my honest answer is that I have no real allegiance to any hard drive brand amongst the name brands. So say between Western Digital and Seagate.
Yeah.
Whatever's the best capacity, the best sell with the best warranty among reputable brands, I say just go for it. So my drives are like a hodgepodge of different brands that have been on sale various places over the years. I just don't think it matters because they're all going to fail eventually, and so get something that fits the budget. I wouldn't go buy, Bob's brand hard drive.
Yeah.
Don't buy a hard drive from a guy on the side of the road in a van. But if it's a reputable brand from a reputable store, I'd say get the best deal you can get, honestly.
If you want to get scientific about it, Backblaze, which is a company we're going to talk about later in the show, publishes their hard drive statistics because they buy a lot of hard drives. They do a lot of storage. And you can look at, what brands do better or worse on their list. But for me, honestly, I've been buying the Seagate ones because they're cheap on Amazon. They come in 5 colors, so I can get different colors. I mean, like for me, gray is, I think gray is Time Machine and red is Archive. So when I look under the desk, I can say, oh, that's this one. I mean, it just makes it really easy.
That's cool.
And I just run a camel, and they go on sale, often.
Yeah.
So when I've got one that's aging out, I'll just replace it. And then, as we'll talk about later with our manic backup routines, I have more than just the ones under my desk. But so Time Machine, I think, is it's something that both novice and power users alike should all be using. Whenever someone asks me to set up a Mac for them, they always want to sometimes they offer to pay me, and I'm like, don't pay me. Just I send them the Amazon link. I tell them to buy this and have it at their house. When I get there. That's my fee. Is I'm not going to set it up unless you have a backup drive. And
it's a good rule.
It works. People do it. It's kind of funny. We laugh about it, and then when they see how easy it is, it's great. Another thing I would suggest, both for power users and novice users, if you can, just get a drive that you just plug into the back of it. We're going to talk in a minute about network Time Machine, which is possible, but the simplicity, especially if you're on a desktop, of just plugging it in and forgetting is really, I think, the way to go.
I agree. It's faster. It's simpler.
Yeah, it's much faster. It's not only faster to save, it's faster to access when you're trying to pull things off of it. The problem, of course, is the laptop problem. You're not at the desk all the time.
Sure.
What do you recommend in that case?
I think in that case, if you have another Mac running, turning on Time Machine server and, having a big external hard drive, say you have a Mac Mini or something or an iMac floating around, I think is probably the way to go. If you're using your laptop all over the house. If you're somebody like my wife, for instance, who has a MacBook Air, most of the time it's at a desk hooked into a LG Ultrafine display. And so I have her Time Machine drive dangling off the back of that monitor. And there are times where she uses the laptop, away from her desk for a few days at a time. But I'm pretty much guaranteed that every few days, at least, that thing is going to be on the desk and it'll catch up there. So, I think look at how you use it. If you're a student and you're on campus all day, maybe have a USB drive in your dorm and make sure you plug it in at night. Just do something. Don't let that hold you up. I will include in the show notes. This is one of those things. Maybe this happens to you, David, where I Googled set up Time Machine server and my blog post was the first thing on Google.
Don't you love that?
I put that in the show notes because that's what Google told me was the good article for it. I forgotten that I had written this, but here it is.
I have what my wife's computer is a challenge because she's not going to take the time to plug a drive in. It's a laptop. That's her only computer. So my solution was we did run Time Capsule for the longest time, but that router is bit the dust, and I didn't want to screw around with it. So I just put a drive and a cable in the little basket where we hold our TV remotes. And because she's always using her laptop downstairs on the kitchen table, whenever I go to get the TV remote, I'll see it in there. And if I see the drive, then I see her computer sitting alone on the kitchen table, I'll just plug it in. And it's getting backed up. I'm not even sure she's aware of it.
Another common question with Time Machine is about excluding files. So maybe you have something you don't want to go to Time Machine for some reason. You can do that in the Time Machine system preferences pane. There's a drop down where you can drag folders in. I don't have any recommendations around that. I back up everything to Time Machine because that drive is always in my possession. But maybe if you have something you want to exclude for whatever reason, it is doable. Another big question is APFS. So with macOS High Sierra last year, Apple moved from HFS Plus, the drive file format, to APFS on the internal drives.
Yeah.
Time Machine can back up an APFS Mac no problem. Clearly it can, because Mojave, all these new systems come with it. But if you need to format a drive for Time Machine, it needs to be HFS Plus. And if all that sounds like alphabet soup, if you plug in a drive and you say, and macOS asks you, do you want to use this with Time Machine? And you click yes, it takes care of it for you. But if you do need to format a drive, you want to make sure it's in HFS Plus. There's a link in the show notes to an Apple support document about that and how to do it. It's really not a big deal to get it going correctly. If you try to back up to an APFS volume, I believe macOS will tell you that it can't, and it'll give you prompts to get it formatted correctly. So not a huge deal, but that question does come up sometimes about this format. This will change in the future, but as we're recording this, with macOS Mojave being the current macOS release, this is how things are.
Yeah, I'm actually eager to see Time Machine evolve with APFS because it's a much more powerful file system. And I would imagine that Time Machine is going to get more efficient and probably more powerful as Apple gets more comfortable with it and transitions Time Machine over to APFS.
Yeah, they're doing like a few things. So one thing Time Machine does is local snapshot. So say like in your wife's case, that notebook may not be plugged into that Time Machine drive super often. The Mac is keeping up with the changes it needs to copy to Time Machine, and that is called like a local snapshot. And they've gotten a little bit better about the way they make those, the way APFS gives Apple some additional tools to manage that sort of stuff. But Time Machine could become more powerful and faster once they complete that transition. I think the reason they haven't is APFS is really designed for solid state drives, and I would imagine that 99% of Time Machine volumes out there are spinning hard drives. So yeah, I'm not holding my breath for that anytime soon. And the reality is it works great, right? Like right now in front of me is my iMac Pro formatted in APFS. My 4 terabyte, whatever drive it is under my desk, is HFS Plus, and it works perfectly. So you don't have to worry about compatibility issues between the two.
Before we move on, restoration from Time Machine. People often talk about getting Time Machine going, but they don't talk about restoring files. We talked about going into the app and restoring individual files, but what if you want to set up a new Mac from a Time Machine drive?
This is exactly why I think people should use Time Machine, because you have easy restoration. So if you are setting up a new Mac, you can, in the setup process, there's a screen that says, hey, do you want to transfer your information? And the options are from a Mac or Time Machine backup, from a Windows PC, or to another Mac if you're using a migration assistant. Like, you click the Time Machine option, you have the drive plugged into the new computer, and it moves everything over for you. And it's just like you never left your old Mac. It is about as seamless as it gets. It's built into the installer, and this is really why I recommend Time Machine, because when you need to restore, it's by far the simplest way to do it.
Yeah, in the old days, Migration Assistant meant you had to have your old Mac and cable it directly into the new Mac. And it was a little more harrowing. I mean, it worked, but I mean, there were problems too. I really like the idea of just taking a Time Machine backup, plugging it into a brand new machine, and pressing go. And it sets up. It does a good job.
Yep. And at the end of that process, so you've unboxed your new iMac, you restored from your Time Machine drive from your old Mac. Once that's all done, the new Mac will ask you, hey, do you just want to inherit all this Time Machine history you have from your previous computer? You click OK, and then you're backing up with Time Machine on the same drive moving forward. So Apple's even thought about that side of the process as well.
All right, Time Machine. Everybody do it. Tell your friends, do it.
Yes.
That's the message. This episode of the Mac Power Users is brought to you by Text Expander. Unlock your productivity with Text Expander. With Text Expander, you can make everything you write repetitively available everywhere you type. Text documents, spreadsheets, web forms, whatever. Keep your messages consistent, accurate, and up to date by sharing snippets with your coworkers. I do that at MacSparky. I've got someone helping me out with some of the email support. I write those email replies, even the ones that she triggers remotely, all because we have a shared Text Expander for Teams account. Text Expander for Teams makes it easy to organize snippets for your support and customer service departments, and allows you to get your best words out to all of your customers. With Text Expander, you can turn your snippets into forms with fill-in and pop-up fields, optional text blocks, autofill dates and times and graphics. If you're one of those people that has like a Word document or a text file full of big, long things that you frequently write in email and you have to go get it, you have to stop doing that. Go get Text Expander. It automates that process for you, and it makes it even better because with those fill-ins, you can customize each one of those replies. It's faster and better. Text Expander is available for macOS, Windows, Chrome, iPhone, and iPad. And if you're listening to the Mac Power users, you get 20% off your first year. To do that, go to textexpander.com/podcast and make sure to tell them you heard about it here on the Mac Power users. Unlock your productivity with Text Expander. Once again, that URL is textexpander.com/podcast and Mac Power users. What about offsite services? I think that's probably the next logical step.
I want to divide offsite services kind of into two buckets. We have like services like Backblaze, which is what I use, CrashPlan, there are others. And then just the idea of having your drives somewhere else. So we'll talk about that in a second.
Yeah, kind of the roll your own options.
Sure. And I do both.
Of course you do.
These offsite services, most of the time on the Mac, they're a menu bar application. They sit watching your hard drive. They back up changes to a cloud service provider. Like I said, I use Backblaze. Yes, they have been a sponsor of many relay shows in the past, but it's a great product. I've used it before the sponsorship. I'll use it after the sponsorship. It's $6 a month per computer for unlimited space. So like in my family, in my house, we have 4 computers going to Backblaze. So I pay, $24 a month.
Yeah.
The reason I like Backblaze is that it is the most native feeling of these that I have tried. CrashPlan actually has like pivoted away from the consumer space, and they basically just deal with businesses now. So they're still an option if you have a business, but if you're an individual, they're not a great option anymore. But their app on the Mac was always really bad. It was Java for a long time. It may still be.
I had CrashPlan for years, and it just started filling my drive with a temp file. Literally, I'd get the message my drive was full, and and then I'd delete it and try and figure it out. I reinstall. I shouldn't pour gasoline on the fire, but it was rough.
It was rough.
Yeah. So I've been with Backblaze now for quite a while, and not a problem. So.
In fact, the Backblaze client has engineers on it that worked at Apple for a long time, so they kind of understand how Mac apps should look and work. But what's really nice about Backblaze is that it will back up external drives. And so for people like me and you with big archive USB SSDs hanging off the back of our Macs, they get backed up with Backblaze. It will not back up network attached storage. So say you have a Synology somewhere in your network. Backblaze on your Mac isn't going to reach out to that Synology and pull data into Backblaze. But if you have a couple of big external hard drives, it will grab that data, which is really awesome if you work the way that you and I work.
Yeah, not counting my Time Machine drive, which is also directly connected. I've carved that out of the Backblaze. I'm not a masochist to them, but not counting the Time Machine, I've got 6 terabytes of space attached to my iMac at all times. I'm sure, like on the Backblaze spreadsheet of customers they want to get rid of, I'm probably one of them.
Oh, I think you're okay. Backblaze, it's all secure. Files are encrypted on your local machine. They're sent via SSL. The data is encrypted at rest on their servers. Your private key is generated by your username and password. They don't have your password. You can enable 2-factor authentication. So if anyone tries to log into your Backblaze account, it's not you. You will know about it. You'll need to provide a 2-factor code. And what I think is really cool, and like the nerd in me really likes this, is that Backblaze, they're not just upselling space at like AWS or Google or something like some of these other companies. And that's fine. Those are good options. But Backblaze builds their own storage pods. So you mentioned they do these reports about hard drive reliability, and that's in the show notes as well. But they also publish these reports on how they build these giant storage pods full of hard drives. And like down to the fact that they designed their own chassis and they have all of these things. It's all open source, so you can go in here and like build your own Backblaze storage pod and put it in your house if you want. I mean, your family will hate you because it will be extremely loud. But if you wanted to do it, and they do all this and manage everything to keep costs down so they can build exactly what they need and not paying for things they don't need. And the nerd in me just absolutely loves it.
It's great. I mean, I love when somebody solves a problem for you easily. And at $6 a month, you're going to find out I'm not using a bunch of these roll your own services because once I found Backblaze working for me, I'm like, great, $6 a month. I've got a few drives attached, actually a lot, and it's all getting backed up online. Done. One other thing they do is they give you some great restore options. You can download files online. You can download files from your Android or iPhone app, which is individual files. So if I've got my 6, or I guess plus the internal storage on my iMac, my 8 terabytes. If I'm on vacation and I need to get an individual file, I can actually access it with an iOS device from their app. And then if everything burns down, you can have them mail you a drive, which is great.
It's super cool. And I've used that iOS backup before. Like, I just need one file and I'm on the road. And, Backblaze has it, so I can log in to there and get it. So it's a great option. I think what's nice about this is once it's set up, you never have to touch it. So, it's just kind of like Time Machine. That way you get it configured and then it just sits in your menu bar and just does its thing. Sometimes people ask about like the hit on your network and your bandwidth. And, if you have capped internet access through your ISP, you need to keep an eye on what any offsite backup is doing, not just Backblaze. And they have some tools in their Mac app to manage that, manage the speed and that sort of thing. I have mine all set just to automatic, and my network never feels slow if Backblaze is churning on a bunch of stuff.
Yeah, as we talk about it, I'm thinking I just need to get a Backblaze account for Daisy's computer so I don't have to do this madness.
Yeah.
With the, I probably should still do the madness with the Time Machine, but there should be just a regular backup happening at all times. Because if something goes wrong and she loses data, it's my neck. Literally my neck. Yeah, all right. Well, what about some of the competitors? We were kind of mean to CrashPlan because I had a problem with them. I did look up CrashPlan. If you get a small business account, will back up from a networked drive, which is very handy if you're running a small business.
A popular player in the Mac space is Arc, ARQ. It has been around a long time. I've gotten to talk to the developer several times. Arc started life as a way to basically back up data on your Mac to sort of a dumb cloud provider. So Amazon S3, Backblaze B2, which is Backblaze's sort of S3 competitor. It's basically just hard disk space in the sky, Google Drive, Dropbox, etc. And Arc is a Mac app that you can set up and link to one of those online accounts, and then it will back up data from your Mac to one of those providers. The reasons you would want to do this, it may be cheaper for you to back up data to one of these devices, and Arc has a bunch of pages on their website kind of going through the prices of these various places. Maybe you need to put data in a particular place because of limitations at your workplace or something like that. So there are lots of reasons for this. Arc also has this cool deal where you can run Arc on 2 Macs and basically back up to each other. So if you have like an external hard drive at home and at work on separate Macs, you could send data one to the other. And Arc also now runs their own cloud storage. So they run atop Amazon Web Services, Amazon S3, and you can pay them $6 a month for a terabyte of space and use the Arc Mac app, which is really good, and back up to that. So not unlimited like Backblaze is for $6 a month. In my mind, the way I view Arc, and I really like Arc, but I don't use it because Backblaze meets my needs just off the shelf. And something like Backblaze will do that for most people. But Arc is there if you need something more specific, or you have you want to take advantage of Amazon S3 or S3 Glacier or one of these other storage providers. I would say if you're interested in exploring that, go poke through the Arc website. They have a lot of details on those different things. But I think for most people, it's probably too fiddly and maybe overkill for what most average people need.
Yeah, that's kind of what I concluded. But I think if you had to store data on a special location, like for privacy reasons or whatever, Arc is the tool on the Mac. Yeah, so those are the big solutions, I think, at this point for offsite. But I can think of so many over the years that I tried that didn't work that well. And it seems like the problem is pretty well solved now. There's something for everybody. You can get a nice flat fee backup service like Backblaze, or you can kind of get more customizable service with ARQ. Just the idea of cloud backup when this whole game started was kind of questionable because data speeds were so slow, and how are you going to get it back? But I don't think if you've waited because of those problems, you shouldn't wait any longer. Just get one and set it up. It's fine.
There are options, though, to do offsite backups without the cloud. So maybe you do live in a place where that internet upload is still a problem, right? If you're just stuck on satellite internet or something like that. This is where a lot of people can turn to, hey, I'm going to copy everything on my hard drive. I'm going to store that hard drive somewhere else. So if an asteroid hits my house, it won't hit my safety deposit box in the next town over or whatever. There are a bunch of ways to do this. Time Machine, actually, you can use multiple volumes with Time Machine, multiple targets. And so you can have a Time Machine drive that you have plugged in once a month and store that elsewhere. What I like doing here, though, is bootable external drive. So these drives, you can create them with Carbon Copy Cloner or Super Duper. There are a couple other options. Those are the two popular ones.
Yeah.
And basically, if your iMac, the SSD in your iMac just went out, you could plug this drive in and boot your system from your backup. This is a great troubleshooting tool, and it gives you a complete clone of your Mac in an external hard drive. And so I do this. All of my drives around my house, so my external storage, my wife's MacBook Air, our iTunes drive, all of that stuff gets cloned to an external hard drives, and I store them elsewhere. So even though all of that stuff is on Backblaze, I also have them all safe and sound in a undisclosed location.
Wow, that makes it sound really secret. Like, are they in a satellite circling the Earth? I mean, I know you do that show about space.
I've already said too much.
I use Super Duper. I paid for the license for Super Duper like a long time ago. I feel, but he continues to make it work with every operating system upgrade. Both Carbon Copy Cloner and Super Duper have got great automation support over the last few years. So, like with Super Duper, at least I know you can just plug in the drive, and as soon as it sees the Super Duper drive plugged in, it does its thing. You don't push any buttons, or you can have it plugged in permanently, and then it could at a certain time every day update. If you pay for the license, it does those Delta updates, so it doesn't have to erase and recopy your entire drive every time it runs. And just like Steven said, they are plug and play. This would be maybe a candidate for an SSD drive if you had the extra SSD storage and you wanted to be able to get that thing running really fast. When attached to another computer, you could do that. It's just a great solution. I mean, a whole disk encryption, whole disk copy, that was the solution before Time Machine existed. I think it still has a place.
It does. And I like Carbon Copy Cloner. Like you, have used CCC forever. You said you bought Super Duper license years ago. I've just used Carbon Copy Cloner for a long time. Both are excellent utilities. The Venn diagram of their features overlap very tightly. You may find that you just like the layout of one better than the other. You cannot go wrong either way. So I don't think we have a recommendation one over the other.
Agreed.
They're both great. It's an embarrassment of riches. And what's cool about this is you don't necessarily even have to just do bootable external drives. If you have a project folder you want to copy to an external drive every night, outside of the realm of Time Machine, you can set up even little jobs with these applications. And they're a great tool to have around on your Macs.
Yeah, another one I use for little jobs is ChronoSync.
Okay.
Which I don't use to copy a whole drive, but it will watch a folder, and then you can save it in essence as a script where it'll watch the folder, and then when you have it run every set period of time, it'll sync the deltas, either that sync between two, or it'll sync to the archive where, like if you delete something on the source, it'll delete it on the archive. And if you add new, it'll add it to the archive. It's some of the folders, like for instance, my Apple Photos library, ChronoSync puts it on several drives constantly because I just really don't want to lose pictures.
Yeah, I don't have a lot of recent experience with ChronoSync. My experience is all pretty old, so I don't want to judge it based on that. It does seem like it is extremely powerful, but maybe a little bit fiddly, which it's not a bad thing if you have a specific task. So,
Yeah.
like all this stuff, there's multiple ways to do it. I mean, like you could do this in the terminal with like rsync commands too. A lot of these apps are just putting nice UIs around system tools, but yeah, ChronoSync looks like it's quite powerful.
Yeah, it does take a little bit of a learning curve to get it running. But once you get it done, you save it, and then you just press a button. It is part of the setup package, the basic version, which is
awesome.
I've paid the license for ChronoSync, which is another one of these softwares that I think they tell you never have to buy an upgrade once you buy it. But I still just download the basic version from setup because that's easier. And it gives me all the tools I need to do the basic file backups I do with ChronoSync.
We're going to take a quick break and talk about Hover, one of the show's longest running sponsors. We know we all love tech and learning about tech, and Hover is a great tech company to talk about. Their tools are a big leap for people wanting to start projects because every business or project or idea starts with a name, and on the web that means starting with a domain name. Hover has over 300 unique domain name extensions to choose from. So no matter what you want to build, there's a domain name waiting for it. Of course, there's all the traditional .com, .net, but then you get into some fun ones like .coffee, .ceo, and you can really have something that really stands out. And they have excellent technical support to answer any questions you may have, and they're dedicated to getting you online, not upselling you for services you don't need. In fact, Hover has free Whois privacy, so bad guys don't get your info. A really clean user interface when going through the shopping cart, so you're not going to get things added on unexpectedly. They have monthly sales on popular top-level domains. It's really pretty easy to see why Hover is the popular choice for people wanting to start businesses or projects. I've used Hover for years. My domain, 512 Pixels, is there, and a bunch of associated domains, and the whole experience is great. When I have something coming up for renewal, Hover just sends me an email saying, hey, this is coming up. Unless you want to auto-renew, you have time to turn it off if you want. But I want to keep those domains renewing, so I let it go through. And anytime I've ever had a question about DNS or something else, the Hover support is just, it's out of this world. Buy your domain and start using it today. Go to hover.com/MPU to get a 10% discount on all new purchases. Once again, that's hover.com/MPU. Make a name for yourself with Hover. Our thanks to Hover for their support of the Mac Power users. So, how do you back up all your stuff, David?
So many ways, Stephen. So many ways. No, actually, I feel like my backup system has taken a turn towards sanity over the last few years. It was a little insane for a while. For the Mac, the first step for me, of course, is Time Machine. I have Time Machine plugged in at the bottom of the computer. It's always running. I don't even think about it. I rarely access it except when something goes wrong, like what happened to me this morning. But I just love having it there. It's my old friend, always backing up. And I did switch over to Backblaze several years ago, and it's the same thing. You don't even think about it there. Once in a while, I'll get like an update to the software or something and go up there and look and see that I'm entirely backed up to Backblaze. And it's just kind of shocking to me because I generate massive size files when I'm working on videos. Backblaze just manages to get them put up there. Where I start to go off the deep end a little bit is all these archive drives I've got attached to my computer. I've got a big Seagate I think it's 4 or 5 terabyte drive underneath. That gets copies of a bunch of data from my iMac. I've got that SSD that I don't know, how would you say I attach it to my Mac? I don't know.
In the most upsetting way possible.
Yeah, so almost like I almost just like should have just screwed it to the back of the iMac, just like put some screws through it. But I've got that there too that is holding. So the way it works, of course, you run out of room on your SSD. It seems like it's always the case, especially if you work with media files. So I've got the active media on the internal drive of the iMac, and I've got the inactive but sometimes needed media files on that external SSD. And both of those are getting pushed via ChronoSync updates to the archive drive attached to it. In addition, that archive drive also has other backups of things that are just kind of like long-term storage. And so because the archive is attached to the iMac and because I have a Backblaze account, those things are always getting backed up offsite. But then what I did is I keep buying these Seagate drives. The 5 terabyte ones are big enough to hold all of my data, all my key data. And I have them sprinkled around like, I don't know, like Johnny Appleseed's apples. I have drives. I have them. I have one in my drawer sitting next to me. I've got some in some other places. I've got one that's offsite. So I've got an additional offsite that way with my sister-in-law where she just keeps it at her house. And once in a while she'll come over. I'll be at her house and I'll grab it and replace it with another one. So there's 2 that are constantly swapping between the 2. And granted, those aren't up-to-date backups, but they're within a month of up-to-date. So I've got that as well. Let me think. I think that's about it. That's all. And I guess what I would say is the photos library there's like 10 copies of my photos library. I mean, it's just like everywhere. Anytime I find an extra drive, I just put a copy of the photos library on it.
That's not a bad idea. Out of everything on my machine, that's the most important to me.
Yeah.
Mine is actually very similar to yours. I use Time Machine for my internal iMac SSD. I have 2 4 terabyte SSDs on externally for storage. One is sort of cold storage. The other is kind of warm storage. Like I've said before, the line between those 2 SSDs is very thin.
Yeah.
Those also get sent to Backblaze along with the internal SSD. So I've got quite a bit on Backblaze. And then I use Carbon Copy Cloner to create offsite clones of every drive. And I update that about once every 2 to 3 weeks. So that set of offsite drives, there is one labeled iMac Pro clone. There's an archive clone. There's a external SSD clone.
Yeah.
Clone for my wife's notebook, one for my notebook. So I have several offsite drives. And like you said, they're not the most up to date, but they are close enough where I could, if something really catastrophic happened, I could get to them. And I make them bootable for the internal drives, which is really nice. And those are all rotating storage. This is all hard drives because it doesn't, backup drives are totally fine for rotating storage. And that's sort of what I've done for a long time. So I feel like I'm following in the steps of 3-2-1. And if I lose something, Time Machine is where I go first, and then Backblaze. But if I ever need to recover a lot of data, it would be that those offsite drives. So for instance, a couple of years ago, the external hard drive that had some iTunes stuff on it went belly up unexpectedly. And, iTunes is a thing where I could re-download any purchases, but it would take a long time. And so basically I swapped in the clone drive and downloaded, I think, the one movie that it didn't have in like the interleaving couple of weeks. So it's nice that you have options when you want to recover. And that's a big thing people miss is like make sure wherever you're storing this stuff, you can recover it easily.
Yeah.
Even if it's just copying it in Finder, like that's better than nothing. But if you're using Time Machine or Backblaze, whatever you're doing, make sure you can get that data back in a timely fashion.
Yeah, I forgot to mention that I do use Super Duper on my iMac. I don't do it on my laptop. It's not my laptop, actually. But the
I was gonna say, yeah, you just really assumed.
I know I'm going to give it back to him at some point. But but with the iMac, before I do a major upgrade, even the 0.1 upgrades, I just run. That's when I run the Super Duper. I just I attach it and download it before I do a system update.
Yeah,
and then I stick it in the drawer. And I'm getting lackadaisical about it because I never seem to use it or need it. One day I will, of course. The one thing that we didn't really mention throughout this whole extended discussion is you do need to test your backups. So whatever system you're using, make sure you go into your Time Machine, into your archive drives, or try and download some files from Backblaze. Just make sure everything's working. You don't want to find out after something goes wrong that your backup wasn't working. It's very easy to test those these days. I remember one time I worked for a firm where they had a tape system. It was very complicated.
Oh, gosh.
And they didn't realize for like a year the tapes weren't working, And fortunately, I worked there, of course. So when we set it up, I said, can we also just attach a hard drive to the back of it? And they did. And the hard drive was our fail-safe. But the tape drive that we had been screwing around with for a year wasn't even working. Okay. That's the Mac.
Yeah.
What about, okay, so what about the person who isn't going to listen to Mac Power Users for an hour on backups? What do you tell them, or how do you get them to back up?
You plug a hard drive into their computer and turn Time Machine on.
Yeah.
And then you take their debit card and set up Backblaze.
Yes. My advice, exactly. Those two items.
This is September. The holidays are near. It's kind of a nerdy gift to get like your dad a 4 terabyte hard drive, but maybe you just like include that in the holiday plans. You're going home for Thanksgiving.
Yeah.
You're going to get asked about how to check email. Like, just make sure everyone's getting backed up. It's a good opportunity to do it. You can get external hard drive for Time Machine so cheap. Like, if it's somebody in your family, you just need to do it as a gift. Like, that's better than getting the phone call saying they've lost everything. So Time Machine, definitely Time Machine and Backblaze, if they can swing it, it's a great way to go.
And the thing about when working with someone who's not into this stuff, I think the key is finding solutions where they don't have to do anything. And that's why I think Backblaze and Time Machine less so unless it's a stationary Mac, but Backblaze in particular are great solutions because they don't even know they're running.
So let's switch gears a little bit and talk about backing up our iOS devices.
Much easier. Much easier.
Much easier. You really have sort of two paths you can take. The first one is using iTunes, or in Catalina, Finder. It's in Finder now.
Yeah.
But basically what this is doing is using your Mac or PC to make a backup file of the contents of your iOS device. So iPhone, iPad, iPod Touch. And you do it over cable. So it means it can be way faster than iCloud if you have poor internet access, because iCloud backups require Wi-Fi. They don't work over LTE. And, again, if you're somewhere where your upload speed is pretty abysmal, this can be a nice way to keep your stuff backed up. There are a couple of things to look out for here that we wanted to highlight. One, by default, these backups are unencrypted. And so that means that app passwords, health data, and Apple Watch settings will not be included in your backup by default. And the way to fix this is when you go into iTunes and you select your device and you hit the backup button, the pop-up will ask you if you want to enter a password. And you do, that password will encrypt the backup and it will include all of that data. Now, that is a password you do not want to lose. So go put it in your password manager, whatever that is, because if it's time to restore from that backup, say you buy a new iPhone and you want to restore the backup, or something happens to your phone and you need to wipe it and start over, if you don't have that password, that backup is not usable. And the Mac will ask you if you want to save it in the system keychain. You can do that, but you need to know that password moving forward, because if you lose that key, then that password is just dead weight.
Yeah, but it's so useful if you do encrypt it, because then when you restore it, it restores your passwords and your health data, and it saves you so much time of entering your passwords over and over again as you work with a unencrypted restore.
I wish that, I don't understand why that's not just the default.
Yeah.
I think it should be, but definitely you want to hit that option. And I've done this a lot over the years, and you can use this, moving to a new device, which we'll talk about. But David, you brought up a good point about the space these takes up, and this is something that I haven't thought about in a while, because I don't use this day to day.
Yeah, I was noticing on one of the laptops in our house that it was full of the drive was full, so I started looking into what was using a lot of space, and it turned out we had like 4 or 5 different iOS devices that we didn't even use anymore backed up to that computer, taking a significant amount of space on the drive. So when you go into the iTunes preferences devices, and I guess that'll be under Finder once this moves to Finder in a month, you can see the backups that are on the drive and you can remove them. At the time I did it, I actually just dug it out in the library application support /mobile sync /backup folder you kind of have to dig for, but they're there as well. And I was able to free up a lot of space. So these are great to make. Just make sure you're aware of them. And if you're having space problems, this may be a place to get some space back.
Something like a Daisy Disk can make it easy to find those.
Yeah, exactly. I like to kind of treat that the same way I treat my carbon copy or clones or my super duper clones is I don't do this all the time. I'm not going to get a copper wire out and connect my phone to my Mac very often. It's just not something I want to do anymore. I feel like I've done my time with that cable. But before major updates, that's a great opportunity to do it. Like before I installed the betas, I did it. And, before the 0.1 updates come out, unless I get the 0.1 without realizing it, like I did last week, I would do that backup and always encrypt it. And
it's nice for people who don't pay for iCloud storage, which is kind of the next, really the secondary way you can do this. You can use iTunes or you can use iCloud. This is found in the Settings app on your iOS device, iCloud Backup. And it works when on Wi-Fi and charging. For most people, that just means at night, right? You put your phone down on the wireless charging pad or you plug it into Lightning at night and you're at home, it will back up. It includes nearly all data and settings stored on your device. There are some exceptions, so things that are already in iCloud. So say that you sync your contacts and calendars to iCloud. It's not going to back that up again. It already has it. So that's sort of a big chunk of data it doesn't have to worry about if it's already in iCloud. Or if it's stored in other cloud services, so like Gmail or Exchange email won't be backed up in this. It does not back up Face ID, Touch ID, or Apple Pay information and settings because that data is only local to your device for security purposes. So if you set up a new phone, you have to reset up Touch ID or Face ID or whatever. That is to be expected.
I don't think it's even possible to back that data up because of the way it's stored on the device.
Absolutely. In fact, this goes for the iTunes stuff as well. This stuff stays on device, which is the way I want it to be and the way it should be. Look, this means that you're probably going to need to pay for iCloud storage because the 5 gigabytes a month that are free, you're going to burn through very quickly.
Yeah.
I know that some people are upset on that on like the principle of the thing, and I totally understand that. But backing this up is so easy. And for most people, unless you just have like a ton of devices, the 50 gigabytes for 99 cents a month is more than enough, even for most people's iCloud photo libraries, and you can pay more if you need it. We're on the 2 terabyte plan because we have a family sharing account. But for me, the little bit of money it is a month to know that my iPhone and iPads are backed up and I get all the other benefits of having iCloud storage, that's well worth it for me. Even if someone just has a single iPhone, you're probably going to go over that free limit. But I understand, and I wish Apple gave us more space, but in the world that they don't, I think that it's a reasonable expense a month to back up a really expensive iPhone for a buck or $3 a month. It seems to make pretty good sense to me.
Yeah, it doesn't make sense to me, to be honest with you. I mean, I think you have to do it. You don't have a choice. But when you pay $100 extra to get additional storage, but then they say we're still only going to give you 5 gigabytes of storage.
Oh yeah. No, I agree with that. Yeah, I'm just saying it in that world where that is true, like paying for it makes sense for the benefits you get.
Yeah.
I wish we didn't have to pay for it, but totally. It's criminal. They only give us 5 gigs.
Yeah, I agree. I guess we're on the same page. It's a no-brainer. Pay it for your, pay it for your elderly parents, pay it for your children, pay it for the people that, the immediate people in your life that don't know better, and the people that aren't your immediate people, just tell them to pay it. Mm-hmm. Use the, cup of coffee speech or whatever works for you. But the thing that, it really, getting back to the underlying premise of backup is photos. If you don't have enough storage to cover all of your photos and your phone, falls into the river, you're going to lose photos. It's just a given. Mm-hmm. And so paying $1, somewhere between $1 and $5 a month to make sure you get those stored is a no-brainer. But I feel like Apple should be able to find a way to do this without us having to pay. And I think the reason, number one is I don't like being chiseled, but I think the bigger reason is just think about customer satisfaction. Tim always likes to talk about that. What's he call it? Customer sat.
Customer sat. Ugh.
Yeah. I mean, how many people, because they aren't going to pay $1 a month, are going to lose photos and be very angry with their Apple devices when that happens? I mean, it's a solvable problem. I always wonder, is it just because the number of iPhones, if suddenly you gave 50 gigs, would their server farms be overwhelmed? I mean, I don't know what maybe that's the reason.
I'd imagine those numbers get wild. Like, I'm sure they're already like sort of hard to understand, even 5 gigs per account. But yeah, I mean, I wouldn't want to solve that problem, but I feel like Apple needs to do something.
But honestly, if someone put me in Tim Cook's chair, I would say today, I want someone to start solving that problem. I mean, I don't want people who spend $1,000 on our phones to ever worry about losing photos. It seems to me like that's a solvable problem. Maybe it means you've got to put some more billions into, I don't know. Maybe I'm simplifying. It's very easy from the outside to say stuff like this. So I don't know, but I do wish that people who bought these very expensive devices would not have to worry about that. And I just, as someone who's an enthusiast, I get so tired of hearing from friends about, well, I'm not going to give them $1 a month. I'm like, no, you probably shouldn't have to, but you should. Anyway, backup. Make sure you turn the iCloud backup on, even if you're going to do the attached to the Mac, cable storage. That's great, but the iCloud backup is encrypted by its nature. It's always running. It's so nice. I mean, all the nonsense we just talked about on the Mac. We spent an hour on the Mac. You don't have to do it. You don't have to worry about that stuff. I mean, if you have the iPhone with sufficient iCloud storage, you're largely fine.
I've used iCloud backups for a long time. iCloud's been bulletproof in this regard. I don't know how many phones I've restored with iCloud backup. It's been great.
Yeah, and it didn't start out that way. I mean, Apple, good on Apple for as much as they've improved that over the years. But I use iCloud, that's it. And then, like I said, before major updates, I will connect it and make an encrypted backup on my Mac. But that's like maybe 2 or 3 times a year I do that. Mm-hmm. So now that you've got it backed up, what about restoring your iOS device?
It's really straightforward. So if you've used the iTunes method, you plug your device into iTunes, and when it shows up as a new device, there's a restore from backup button. And if you had a password on your encrypted backup, you put your password in, and you're off to it. If you used iCloud,
that's the fastest way too, I would say, probably.
It is fast because it's local data just over USB, right? Like you're not waiting on iCloud to download a bunch of stuff. If you did use iCloud, though, during the quick start process of setting up a new device, just like on the Mac with Migration Assistant, it says, hey, do you want to restore data from another source? And you can plug in your iCloud credentials, and it will download your latest iCloud backup. And new this year, as of iOS 12.4, so that most of us will experience this with iOS 13, or if we buy a new phone this fall, you can use Direct Restore, which allows you to run a cable in between 2 iPhones and move data directly, which is pretty cool. So you need like a SD or a Lightning to USB adapter, then a USB to Lightning cable. So effectively you have a Lightning cable in each end. It's kind of funny looking.
Yeah, Lightning to Lightning.
Yeah, but it will transfer that data directly from device to device. This is new, and it seems really useful in a lot of situations. So you got really kind of 3 main options there.
Yeah, I think that's going to be really helpful for like if you get a new phone this year. This episode of the Mac Power Users is brought to you by Squarespace. Make your next move with Squarespace and enter offer code MPU at checkout to get 10% off your first purchase. I love Squarespace. I use it for all of my stuff. Mac Sparky, my Sparks Law website, everything does it. And you can too, because no matter what it is you want to create, whether it's an online store, portfolio, or blog, Squarespace has got you covered. I have to admit, I love the internet, but I don't want to be an internet web programmer, and that was the problem I was facing before I found Squarespace. I was using sites that had all this crazy nonsense and plugins and things that weren't working properly, and I just got tired of it, so I signed up for Squarespace, and ever since then, it's just been great. They have award-winning 24/7 customer support if you need any help. They let you quickly and easily grab a unique domain name, and all of those award-winning templates are beautifully designed for you to show off your great ideas. With a Squarespace account, they start at just $12 a month. And like I said, I've got my whole Mac Sparky empire running on Squarespace. And you can start with a trial with no credit card required by going to squarespace.com/MPU. And when you decide to sign up, use the offer code MPU to get 10% off your first purchase of a website or domain and to show your support for the Mac Power users. If you've never signed up for a website, if you've never created your own website, just go on and get the free 2-week trial and just try it out. See how easy it is to build your own website, and then you'll come up with ideas to use it. Once again, that's squarespace.com/MPU and the offer code MPU to get 10% off your first purchase. Thank you, Squarespace, for all of your support of this show and Relay FM. Squarespace, make your next move, make your next website. Okay, so we've been going on backup for a while, but I want to talk about getting ready for Catalina and iOS 13 for a little while. As we record this, Catalina isn't far off. Apple has the September 10th announcement that's going to be coming up shortly after the show publishes. We'll get a lot more information then. I guess, the grapevine is maybe Catalina won't ship as early as we thought, but it is coming at some point. So I guess the first question is, do you have a device that will support it?
Yeah, so the system requirements are a little bit changed from previous years. Any one port, 12-inch MacBook is supported. And then the MacBook Air, Pro, Mac Mini, or iMac, you need a 2012 or newer. So if you have an early 2011 iMac, that's no longer supported. 2012 or newer for all of those models. And then the iMac Pro and the 2013 Mac Pro are also supported. Apple still does a good job of supporting devices for a long time. You can run Catalina on a device that you can't get support for anymore because it's a legacy product, which is kind of funny.
Yeah.
2012 for most products, 2015 for the MacBook, 2013 for the Mac Pro.
I think this may be the last year for my wife's laptop. I think it is a 2012.
It could be. Generally, they change this every other year. So you may squeak by one more time, but I would imagine that sooner rather than later, they'll move this to 2013 or 2014 as time marches on.
All right. Well, so make sure you've got a current machine. We're going to talk about the features of Catalina in a future show. We've got a bunch of content. We've been running betas. We've got a whole bunch of opinions and ideas about it. But today we're talking about getting ready. And the one, I guess maybe 2 points I would talk about in getting ready is number one is just the security stuff, and we'll talk about this more in depth on the show when it releases. But Apple has taken a turn, I think, on security that I'm not entirely happy with. So
Catalina means a lot of things in this regard. So some cool things are like the system volume is now read only, and your user data is on a separate volume that is obviously read write to you. This will cause some issues for people on day one. So, for instance, I'm running Catalina now full time on my MacBook Pro, and I had to find a beta of Backblaze that would work with it because the way they monitor files didn't work.
Yeah.
So you're going to run into some issues there. If you have any like system utilities, you want to make sure that they're ready for Catalina. The part of this that I'm not excited about is there are, at least in the beta, there are a lot of pop-ups and interrupts while you're doing things. So we saw this in Mojave a little bit where you had to, add an app to the system preferences for like full disk use, and Apple was never really clear when you need to do that. Something just wouldn't work until you did it. That sort of continues in Catalina. Anytime a new app looks to write to your desktop or documents, it's going to ask you if you can do that. I think it's heavy-handed. I think people will click OK without reading it after the third day. And that is not a good situation to be in because you want people to read security alerts and people are going to start ignoring them. This could change before it comes out, but at least in the beta, I feel like Apple's gone too far in some of the warning stuff that people are going to be presented with over and over.
Yeah, agreed. And we're going to talk about this more in depth when they actually release it. But the thing that you really need to be thinking about as you prepare to install Catalina is the transition from 32 to 64-bit apps. Apple's warned us about this. This has been going on for a couple of years, but if you've got a 32-bit app on your computer, This year, they mean it for real. It's not going to load.
It's not going to work. And we talked about this utility a couple of months ago, but there's a Mac app called Go64. There's a link in the show notes. Download it, run it. It will give you a report after it runs telling you any 32-bit software on your Mac. If you were like me, you will be surprised on how much is still hanging around. And you can be in the process now of preparing for that transition, because there is no way forward for these apps. 32-bit apps are going to be gone. That means apps that use the old Carbon framework are all gone. Most people are probably okay for most things, but if you have that one Mac app that you've used for years and years and hasn't been updated in a long time, those sorts of programs are going to be the ones that are at risk here. And so I would highly recommend going to check out Go64, run it, and see what you have to do, because once you install Catalina, it's a one-way street without, pretty major surgery. So you want to do this preparation now to be ready when it comes out.
Yeah, in fact, I think that is probably step one. This is something you can do today if you're listening to the show. We'll put a link in the show notes.
Yeah.
Download and run Go64. It just takes a minute. It's a small app. St. Clair Software. It's the same people who make what's the name of that app? The
Default folder X10.
Yes. Very reputable developer, been around a long time. You're fine installing their app, and you're going to get a list. And like looking at mine, I can see a couple things in here that are ancient that I never use, and a couple that I use often. And if it's something you need to get your work done, now would be the time to contact the developers and find out what's going on. Maybe they've got some betas and they can get you in on their beta, so you're good on day one. Or maybe they won't respond to your email and you'll realize that you're going to lose that app and it's time to start looking for a replacement. But this is something that you don't want to discover after the install is complete.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Especially if it's critical to your workflow, every day.
Scary. Mm-hmm. iOS 13, we've got iOS 13 and iPad OS. I think you call it iPad OS 13, but I'm not sure. I can't seem to...
Yes, I think they've inherited the number.
Yeah, it would make sense. Compatibility, once again, we've got iPhone 6S or newer, including the SE, and iPod Touch 7th generation or newer, iPad Air 2nd generation or new. That's pretty good, iPad Air 2nd generation, and iPad Mini 4. And that is not the current one, right? Or is that the current one? I've lost track on the iPad Mini.
Believe it's the one before the current one.
But you need to take a look at that with respect to your devices, assuming that you've got it. And there's a lot of cool features. I am very excited about iOS 13, honestly. And I can't wait to talk about all the stuff we've been doing with it once they release it. But you've got to be ready for that. Another thing I guess you should be thinking about is the new reminders.
I think that's the big one this year. I haven't had any compatibility issues with apps on. So I have iOS 13 beta now on my phone. I've had it on my iPad all summer. I haven't had any apps that, just refuse to work. There are bugs here and there, but that's to be expected.
Yeah.
But reminders is kind of how Notes was several years ago, if you remember, where brand new Notes app, new formatting, and you had to upgrade your Notes database. And on devices that you didn't update, it would stop syncing. Reminders is the same way. When you launch Reminders in iOS 13, it says, hey, we have all this new stuff. If you want to use the new stuff, hit the update button and it will upgrade your database for you. And it shows you these are the devices that you'll lose the syncability with. So for me, like my iMac Pro would have been left out, which would be sad. It will also break sharing with people who have not updated to iOS 13 and Catalina. So in my case, I have a shared grocery list with my wife. I'm on iOS 13. When I upgrade out, that grocery list will break between the two of us, and we can't reshare that until she's on iOS 13 later this fall. So that's the tricky bit with iOS 13. The new reminders looks really awesome, but if you're going to keep your Mac on something older or you're going to sync with someone who's not going to update, you need to be aware that you can't use those new features. And if you say remind me later, it's really easy to do in the future. The app basically works exactly how it used to, but with kind of the new UI, but none of the new features. And so that's the one. Don't just hit that button without thinking about it, because you may end up breaking something somewhere else.
Yeah, it's something to think about. It's kind of like the holistic upgrade approach anyway. I mean, when we first started thinking about upgrades, Apple made one device. It was a computer, but now they make so many different devices, and these updates all drop very close to one another. Mm-hmm. You have to think about, well, how is all this going to work together? Like maybe you can't upgrade your Mac because there's a 32-bit app, for example, that you really need to get your work done, or even maybe a 64-bit app, but it's not upgraded for Catalina. It's going to cause a problem. But then how does that impact your decision on the iPhone and iPad? Well, like one of the things I'm dealing with, because I'm running Mojave on my iMac Pro, and I'm running the iOS 13.1 betas on my mobile devices. Well, the new Notes app works great, and there's some great additional features in Notes, but they don't show up on my iMac, and I'm getting some weirdness in between the sync of the two. I'm not losing data, but its data isn't where I expect it to be because I'm working on two different operating systems. Same thing with reminders. So you may have a showstopper on the Mac that in the end prevents you from realistically upgrading anywhere.
It's a good point. It's an ecosystem now, and that even extends to things like the Apple Watch and the HomePod, which will also have updates this fall.
Yeah.
And they're sort of self-contained, where like the watch just backs itself up before you update, and the HomePod just does whatever the HomePod does. So we're not really covering them here. But you're absolutely right. You need a holistic view of this, especially if you're deep into like these built-in apps. Things, you end up with sort of weird edge cases from time to time. And I think reminders is the one that will catch most people this year. But it's a really good point to consider every fall, that it's not just a single thing anymore. They talk to each other in all these interesting ways that make them more useful, but also make them a lot more complicated. So I thought we could wrap up a little bit, giving a little bit more general advice about the fall updates. So we mentioned a couple of these as we went, but maybe collecting them all in one place.
Okay, you want to start with the Mac?
Let's start with the Mac. So you want to make sure, obviously, that your device meets requirements. macOS won't install on a system that it can't run on, but you don't want to download it if you don't need it. A question we get sometimes is, is it okay to run an old version of macOS? Generally, Apple has security updates for the current release back to for big security issues. The current -1 will sometimes get Safari improvements or WebKit improvements, but I think you're within, the current one or one back, you're still fine. If you're running at this point something like Mavericks, you're not really getting security updates anymore. You got to run into issues, but
yeah.
You want to make sure your hardware is compatible, and you want to make sure that, like you said, your apps are in good shape to survive the 64-bit transition. If you have any 32-bit apps that show up and go 64, you want to deal with those now. And but even beyond that, you want to confirm that key software works with Catalina. And honestly, the best way to do this, in my opinion, is go through things that you use, in your critical workflows, and check in on the developer websites, their Twitter accounts. And, most developers will have a blog on their site, and they'll have a blog post saying, hey, we're ready for Catalina. Hey, we're not. So for instance, people like me and you doing podcasts, we want to make sure things like Audio Hijack, that works, because I need it every day. Something like the Skype will work. And I would say, do not assume that Apple's own software is good to go. So when I look at Go 64, I just ran it again on my iMac. Final Cut, Motion, Compressor, 3 apps written by Apple. They're 64-bit, but they have 32-bit components within them. So Apple will need to update those. And they probably will by the time Catalina is out, but sometimes those lag a little bit, or sometimes it's not that it's broken, but it's buggy. So for instance, right now in the Catalina beta, Logic is really buggy when importing audio files. So which would be a deal breaker for me because I edit in Logic every day. Doing that little bit of research, you don't have to do it for every app on your system, but things that you really depend on day in and day out, you want to make sure are in good shape before you push that button.
Yeah, agreed. I feel like, just look at everything you use to make money with, all the stuff that pays for your shoes. And for everybody, that's different. Maybe it's Microsoft Word. It's something as simple as that. But just make sure that they support the new operating system before you push that button. Like I can tell you, for me, as eager as I was to push the button on some of my devices, the iMac Pro is probably not going to get upgraded on the day of release, or even maybe even within a week or two. I'm going to let dust settle on that. But you need to check these things out. I know of the apps on my system that are always not ready. Like Super Duper usually is, but it's always close because it's a file system thing. Mail Tags, which is an app I use as a mail plugin that helps supercharge Apple Mail. That's usually never ready on the first day, but they always have a beta. They usually have a beta ready on the first day, but not so you get to know those apps. And it's the ones that do hacky system things that are always the slowest because, the developers don't want to try and fix it 6 times. As you go through the beta process, things change. They don't want to fix it and have to fix it again. So some of those apps will wait till the end. And if those apps are key to you, you're just going to have to wait a little while. But go in and figure that out in advance. Just like I said with the 32 to 64-bit transition, after you install is not the time to find out that the app that pays for your shoes no longer works.
You're absolutely right.
Another thing I would do is before pushing the button, we talked about cloning the drive with Super Duper or Carbon Copy Cloner. This is an ideal situation for that app. Plug in a drive, make a complete clone on the old operating system before the upgrade, and then just put it in a drawer and keep it there for like a month or two. Don't overwrite it because you may find out. I remember one year, for some reason, when I did the upgrade, I lost Hazel rules.
Yikes.
I spent all this time making these Hazel rules, but I was able to just go get my clone, restore them from the clone, and all was good. But that's the kind of thing that will bite you. And you might not know it the day after you do the upgrade, but you'll definitely know it within a month or two.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. Sometimes these things take a little while to show up.
Yeah.
I think a big thing is, like you said, you don't have to do this on day one. Even if you buy a new iPhone this year, which I'm sure a lot of our listeners will, even if that's on iOS 13, you can live with iOS 13 and Mojave on your work system if you need to. You got to keep an eye out for reminders. But my advice is make sure that your system, your unique collection of tools and utilities you use is ready to go. That feels a lot more important on the Mac than it does on iOS, in particular this year. But a little bit of homework on the front end could save you a lot of heartache afterwards.
Amen. And also, if you've got people in your life that aren't listening to the show, help them out with this stuff, because I think there's going to be a lot of angry Mac users that rely on 32-bit apps sometime in September or October when they get this installed.
The Mac App Store makes it really tempting to upgrade, right? Like, I actually kind of don't like how easy it is in the Mac App Store, because it's sometimes eventually they'll send you a notification like, hey, you want to upgrade to this? And they make it too casual, I think, especially for this year.
Test your clones, test your backups. I think if you're going to make a backup, make sure they work before you do the install. Make sure all those copies of your photos library are good. It's just, there's a time, anytime you upgrade an operating system, there is a risk. It's like, it's like when you go in for minor surgery, they're still putting you under, right? You never know, right? And so this is a minor surgery for your Mac. Make sure, you have your affairs in order.
Wow.
I know that got kind of dark. Sorry.
That got sort of heavy. On the mobile side, I would say take the time, make an iTunes encrypted backup.
Yeah.
Just so you have it. And make sure your iCloud backup is up to date, because maybe you didn't get on the charger the last couple of nights and your backup's 3 days old or something. So make sure that your backups are in good shape moving forward to iPad OS or iOS.
And to do that, just go on iCloud, then the backups tab, and look at the bottom. Scroll the bottom; it'll tell you.
Yep, it'll show you a date the last time it was successful. So that's I think the most important thing to do is make sure that backup's good to go. And then just know that, especially on like new phone day, the iCloud restore may take a little bit longer than normal, because you and a whole lot of other people are doing it all at the same time. So I think I actually am going to try that local restore this time from my previous iPhone. I want to check that out.
Yeah, me too. I think it's going to be faster. It drives me nuts because I have a lot of apps waiting for them all to download over iCloud restore.
Yep. It takes a while.
What about the case for nuke and pave? And by that, I mean, rather than just upgrading in place, just like going into disk utility and just completely, deleting your drive and restoring from scratch, or doing the equivalent on the iPhone and iPad. Is there a case for that?
I think there are people who kind of believe in that every once in a while. My point of view is that even with these great backup options, that's still a lot of time out of my day. And I don't know the last time I nuked a machine just for fun. Like if you're having some sort of
voluntarily,
if you're having some sort of like system, like macOS system problem, and you can't get away from it, it continues to hound you, then like maybe there's a case for backup with Time Machine, reinstall macOS, format the drive or whatever. But I think for most people, most of the time, that's a thing in the past.
Yeah, every time I meet somebody or talk to someone online about this, and they're like, hey, shouldn't I do a nuke and pave? I always ask them, were you ever a PC user? And the answer is inevitably yes, because I don't know if it's true anymore, but there was a time on Windows where like every 6 months, it seemed like something you had to do, and it actually improved the performance. I just keep rolling, man. I keep going with my devices. I upgrade in place. I never nuke and pave until something seriously breaks, and I don't have a choice.
Mm-hmm. I'm the same. I've got stuff in my user folder from like 10.4 probably. I just keep doing it.
Yeah, I think that's probably safe. And on iOS, I know friends who do that as well. They install from scratch, and they kind of look at it as a way to get rid of app bloat, where you go through, like you've got all these apps on your device, so they just erase the phone and start from scratch. But I feel like a much easier solution to that is just to delete a bunch of apps. But, because the problem is when you do the nuke and pave, you've got all these passwords and settings, even with iCloud and 1Password and some of these other services, it just still takes so long to get things back to the way you had them.
I think on iOS, in my experience, at least when I've done that in the past, is I find broken things for months and months because maybe there's an app or a shortcut that I use, once a quarter. It's like, oh, this is broken, and now I got to fix it, and it interrupts what I'm trying to do. So I'm a big proponent of just rolling forward on iOS.
All right. So I guess to summarize, make sure on the Mac, make sure your software is good. Check the 32-bit stuff. Make a clone. Put it in a drawer. And wait a few days before you install it.
Sounds good to me.
And then on iOS, plug it in, make an iTunes backup, make sure your iCloud is good. Wait a few days. Yeah, that's fair.
Yeah, I think so.
I'm looking forward to these new operating systems coming out. I feel like Apple is... I just wrote an article about this at MacSparky the past week. I feel like Apple is pushing the envelope. I mean, the reason why, it's kind of a little controversial that some of the features got pushed back to 13.1, but I would much rather have them have to push a few things back than bite off a lot less so they get it all at the 0.0 release. If that makes sense?
It does.
I think that, obviously I don't want them to miss everything, but, reaching just a little too far isn't a bad idea, in my opinion. That's the way you make this stuff work. And so we're going to do a whole show on Catalina and the iOS stuff. We got a lot of cool things. Steve and I have both been using the betas for some time, so I think we've got the scars and the joy that come from betas, and we're going to share that all with you pretty soon here. But next week is episode 500, and thank you everybody for listening and going on this journey with us. And I think episode 500 came out great. I can't wait to share it with you.
Yeah, it's going to be really special.
All right. Thanks to our sponsors, SaneBox, Smile, Hover, and Squarespace. See you next week for episode 500.